Hi, and welcome back. I hope that you had a good week. This week in Level F, we're going to be going over lessons 33 to 36. You will need worksheets 22 through 25. The practice worksheet number 1, which is found behind the math journal in the workbook. The 4-in-1 ruler, your math card games book, the basic number cards deck, the corner cards deck, and the multiplication cards deck. All right, so moving on to lesson 33. We are going to be working on multiplying by 2-digit numbers. Have your child complete the warm-ups on the worksheet and then just set that aside for a little bit because we're going to be working on something else. Either on the back of your worksheet or on your whiteboard, go ahead and write the 3 problems as listed in the book. Notice that the first 2 include the answers, so you do want to write the answers down for your child to see, but not for the 3rd one. So ask your child, how do the first 2 equations relate to the 3rd or final equation? And hopefully your child can see that all you need to do is add the 2 equations together in order to make the 3rd equation. Okay. Had you ever thought about that? Because I know I didn't. I had never thought about breaking up, say I was multiplying a number by 32. I had never thought that I could multiply that number by 30 and then add it to multiplying that number by 2. It never occurred to me. But since we do it in Right Start, and since I taught my kids how to do that, it just makes so much sense, and it's really easy to then do mental multiplication, right? All right, so have your child do the final problem, and then go ahead and check that, make sure that it's right, and listen to an explanation as to how it works. Go ahead and have your child complete the first 2 rows of problem number 1, and make sure to discuss the answers before moving on to the next 2 rows. Notice the comment in the right-hand column on the 2nd page about carries. Some people can keep all of those little numbers in their heads, and I'm not one of them, but my kids are, and I think that's because we used Right Start. There is nothing wrong with writing down the carries, but it's up to your child. It doesn't matter one way or the other. As long as they can keep them in their head and keep it straight, they don't have to write it down. All right. Lastly, your child should complete the multivide. Now, big warning here to avoid tears. To avoid the frustration of getting to the division portion and ending up with a remainder and then realizing I made a mistake way up above in the multiplication section, I would really encourage your child to use the check numbers. They will definitely save the day. So after every multiplication, have them do the check numbers to make sure that their answer is right. Okay. And you know, if they stubbornly choose not to use the check numbers, that's fine, but then it's on them if they're frustrated about making a mistake and not realizing it until much later. All right. In conclusion questions, go ahead and write down those questions if they're a little bit too complicated for your child to visualize, because it is a little bit of a complex question. So it's okay to write them down if that will help your child. All right, for the game today, it's a very fun one. Play Card Exchange, which is P27. And this is very much like the game, the commercially sold game called Pit. So it can get a little loud, so just fair warning. There is a blog about this as well. We will be dividing by 2-digit numbers in lesson 34. So after the warm-up multiplication problem, take a look at the example in the book. I will go do that and work through that with you right now.
Okay, so notice the first example. It says 2,628 divided by 12. And just like we did partial products when we started off with multiplication, we're going to do partial divisors for this. And I'm going to write it in such a way that it looks like we're doing a multivide, because in the next lesson, it will be in a multivide. So we're going to have the division box go underneath. And I'm writing the 12 over here to remind myself that that's what we're dividing by. But we have a few choices. We could divide by 3 and a 4, or a 6 and a 2, and it doesn't matter which order. So I'm going to choose the 3 times 4, but I'm going to go ahead and start with the 4. So as I said, it really doesn't matter. I could start with the 3, that would be fine. So I'm going to say 26 divided by 4 is 6, remainder 2, because I got 24 there. 22 divided by 4 would be 5, remainder 2, because 5 times 4 is 20, remainder 2. Then 28 divided by 4 is 7. Now remember, in multivides, you don't want to have a remainder over here. But if you were just doing regular division, this process would still work, okay? All righty. Now I'm going to divide by 3. 6 divided by 3 is 2. 5 divided by 3 is 1. Remainder 2. 27 divided by 3 is 9. Okay, so that's how you could do it. You could have divided by 3 first and then 4. You could have divided by 6 and then 2, or 2 and then 6. It doesn't matter. But I just wanted to give you a glimpse of how this works, because sometimes it's a little confusing to parents, especially since we weren't taught to think this way.
So one issue that I did want to point out with this division method of dividing up the divisor, in this example, 3 and 4, one issue is that sometimes kids get a little over enthusiastic about how can I make that number simpler to divide by, and they'll say 10 and 2. I'm going to divide by 10 and 2. But the problem with that is 10 plus 2 equals 12. And what you have to figure out is what 2 numbers multiplied together equal 12. So just keep an eye out for that, because I know that it's a pretty common mistake. And then just redirect and say, hey, you know, when you multiply 2 times 10, you don't get 12, right? And they'll be like, oh yeah, that's right. After you go through the next example, your child can complete the worksheet and then ask the in conclusion questions and then play card exchange again. All right, in lesson 35, we're going to be working on 2-digit multivides, where the divisor is 2-digit. After the oral warm-ups, you will move right into the worksheet. And these multivides are different from the previous ones because of the way the division will be done, which is exactly the way I just showed you for lesson 34. Okay, so when your child is doing this first multivide problem, I would have them do all the multiplication, making sure that hopefully they're using their check numbers, and then stop before they start the division problem so that you can check the answer to make sure that it's 1,814,400. Because if it's not, then there's going to be so much frustration. So let's make sure that that number is correct before moving on to teaching them how to do the division part, okay? If all is going well, you can just stop interfering, if you want to call it that, stop helping along the way and let your student finish the division part. But if there's hesitancy and they're not quite sure how to divide up the numbers, that's okay. You can go ahead and help them through that first problem. So for example, the number is going to be that 1,814,400 is going to be divided by 15, right? So how could you break up 15? Well, you could do 3 and 5, right? So you could divide by 3 first, or you could divide by 5 first, but you have to divide by both, okay? All right, the rest of the worksheet can be done independently, but feel free to act as a scribe for your child when you get to those questions near the bottom, because sometimes if they have spelling or writing issues, that just adds to the frustration. So it's okay to have them answer the question. You can make sure that they know the answer, and then you could write it out. And what I've done in the past for my kids who've had issues is I write it out on a piece of scratch paper and then they copy it onto the worksheet. So they actually had to write it. They're learning how to spell, or they're practicing their writing or whatnot, but it just divides up the 2 tasks so that it's not so frustrating. All right. Go ahead and finish with the in conclusion questions and then play the game of your choice. All right, moving on to lesson 36. We'll be reviewing measuring in the tenths and multiplying in the tenths. This time the warm-up is found on the practice sheet 1. So remember that that is found behind the math journal section in the workbook. So some children like to take their time with multivides. And so I occasionally bump that to the end of the lesson, depending on how many other children that I need to teach that day and do school with. So your choice, whether you do it as a warm-up or if you just bump it to the end when they can go sit on the couch and take their time to do it. All right, so the remainder of this lesson is pretty simple. Your child will measure one of the cards and figure out how much 2 cards would measure, and 3 and 4 and so forth. And a few of the answers they can check by actually measuring. So they would multiply, say the width of the card was 3.8 centimeters. And so how many would 2 be? So they'd multiply 3.8 by 2. But then they can also measure it to see, am I correct? Did I get the right answer? You don't do that for the entire chart, obviously. And that's why those squares are blocked off. All right. Oh, another thing, if your child is a little bit off in their measurements, I always try to remind them to make sure that they're looking straight down on top of the ruler. Because if you're back a little bit too far, sometimes you can't see the lines very well. So if they're looking straight down at it, it's much easier to get an accurate measurement. All right, finish with the in conclusion questions and then play corners solitaire with stacks. This is game A11, which does have a blog, by the way, so I'll leave a link to that. And then before ending for this week, I wanted to mention something. Notice the second explanation on page 73. It says that figuring out where to put the decimal point will be done by common sense for now. Now, as parents, we have a temptation to just show them, count how many number of spaces there are to the right of the decimal point and then move the decimal point over that many spaces to the left to get the right answer. The problem with that is it stops thinking. So yes, we will get to that point where the student knows that they can just count how many spaces there are and move them over, but we'd like them to discover that on their own, if possible. And so instead of just telling them how to do it, we're going to ask questions to lead the child to figure out what makes sense. So let me give you an example of that.
Okay, so let's take a look at the example of 1.1 times 2.2. So before you even start with the multi-digit multiplication, I want you to take a guess as to what the answer will be. So what I would do to take a guess is I'd say, okay, 1 times 2 would be 2. So it's going to be a little bit more than 2. So I'm going to say 2 plus, right? It's going to be 2 something. Then we're going to go ahead and multiply, but we're going to just ignore the fact that there's decimals there for right now. Okay? So 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 1 is 2. 20 times 1 is 20. 20 times 10 is 200. So I get 2, 4, 2. But I don't know where my decimal places are, right? But remember, I guessed that it's going to be a little bit more than 2. Maybe 2.4, 2.5, something like that, okay? So I can look at this and go, well, obviously my answer is not 242. It's not even 24.2. That's way off from my guess of 2.5 or a little bit more than 2. So what would work? What logically works? 2.42 would work, right? So that lines up with my educated guess up here. And then we could take it a step further. Could it possibly be 0.242? No, absolutely not, because that's not anywhere near 2, right? So this is what we mean by learning where to put the decimal point will be done intuitively, right? By common sense.
So could we have just taught the, count 2 places over, move it in 2 places? Sure, we could have, but then just the rote mechanical process takes over and the learning and the thinking actually stops. So I would really encourage you every step of the way to ask your child questions, to lead them into discovery and to help them think so that things don't become so rote that they don't even know why they're doing it. Okay. And that's all for this week. So I hope to see you next time for lessons 37 to 39. Have a great one. Bye-bye.